So, is this the album that secretly invented pop screamo? You know the sound. It's that perfect, chaotic, beautiful collision of sung melody and raw-throated screaming. It's the formula that made bands like Alexisonfire, Silverstein, Thursday, and Census Fail absolutely massive in the early 2000s, defining an era of post-hardcore. But that sound, that volatile mix of aggression and harmony, didn't just appear out of thin air. But that actual blueprint, the undiscovered first folio of pop screamo, was written years earlier. It was forged in the basements and Legion halls of Southern Ontario, on a criminally overlooked album from a band that was ground zero for the entire scene. To understand this innovation, you have to understand the time. Let's set the scene. It's the mid-1990s, and the punk and hardcore world is heavily segmented. In one corner, you have these brutal metallic hardcore bands like Integrity and Chokehold, inspiring a fierce and aggressive following. In the other, you have the burgeoning emo scene with bands like Captain Jazz, focusing on introspection and raw, often chaotic emotion. The lines were clearly drawn. You were either aggressive or you were melodic. You were political or you were personal. But in Burlington, Ontario, a band called Grade was about to blur those lines completely. Formed in 1994 from the ashes of a previous band, Grade spent their early years grinding it out, playing anywhere and everywhere that would have them. Southern Ontario had a surprisingly eclectic and robust independent music scene, where hardcore bands, emo acts, and even future indie darlings would share the same makeshift stages in church basements or Masonic temples. It was in this environment of musical cross-pollination that Grade started doing something different. While their roots were definitely in hardcore, they began to develop a new style, and this evolution culminated in their 1997 album, Separate the Magnets. On this record, they pioneered a sound that journalist Sam Sutherland would later say seamlessly merged screaming and singing for the first time. It was a true innovation. It wasn't just a hardcore part followed by a melodic part. It was a dynamic, emotional interplay between Kyle Bishop's raw, throat-shredding screams and his surprisingly soulful, clean-sung vocals. This wasn't just mixing styles. It was creating a new emotional language. Now, while the album wasn't a commercial hit, it became a foundational piece of the Southern Ontario scene, a secret handshake among musicians that directly influenced the wave of bands that would later explode into the mainstream. In fact, Shane Told, the iconic vocalist of Silverstein, has specifically and repeatedly cited Grade as a major influence of his own band's sound. While Grade laid the foundation, it took a few years for those seeds to fully bloom into a movement. By the early 2000s, the scene they helped build had become a hotbed of talent. Bands like Silverstein, Alexisonfire, Monine, and Boys Night Out, all from the same Southern Ontario breeding ground, began getting signed to major indie labels around the same time. The stage was set for this new generation to take Grade's DNA and launch it into the mainstream. What came next was an explosion. These bands took that scream and sing dynamic and each put their own unique spin on it. Silverstein polished it into a razor-sharp, radio-ready assault. Alexisonfire famously turned it into the sound of two Catholic high school girls' mid-knife fight, a chaotic, three-vocalist powerhouse. Driven by relentless touring and word of mouth, the entire scene erupted. This new wave of Ontario post-hardcore became undeniable. The songs were in heavy rotation on channels like Much Music and MTV2, and their album sold tens of thousands of copies, proving that the blend of chaos and melody Grade had pioneered had a massive audience waiting for it. The Southern Ontario scene didn't just create a few successful bands, it codified an entire genre, legitimizing the sound that would take over post-hardcore for the next decade. So, while a wave of bands in the early 2000s wrote the Bible that a generation of fans would live by, you could say that Grade provided the stone tablets it was written on. Grade walked so that an entire scene could run, taking an underground innovation and turning it into a global phenomenon. And this is a classic story in music. the unsung pioneers who create the language, and the inheritors who use that language to speak to the world. So what other albums do you think secretly kickstarted this whole pop Screamo craze? Let me know in the comments.